Most of the information for this video is coming from the Memory Alpha wiki. I'm not scouring obscure forum posts from 20 years ago just to get some esoteric knowledge about a franchise that's been dead for 20 years. Again, a franchise that's been dead for 20 years. This list will only really contain topics from Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. There will be some original series topics, but it is not my main focus. All the Kelvin timeline and new Trek content will be ignored as if it is non-canon. And if you have a problem with any of that,
suck my dick!
The sky. Topics here are well known amongst even casual viewers, known as Star Wars fans. The Federation. The United Federation of Planets is a multi-solar system-sized conglomeration of planets within the Alpha Quadrant, operating under a unified government.
A new world order.
Which maintains much of the constitutional republic that the United States was founded on as well. The structure of the government also resembles that of the U.S. The executive branch, which, like the current state of the U.S., is where the President of the Federation operates. The legislative branch, of course, creates, reviews, and passes various laws, and also maintaining the military side of the Federation, Starfleet. Lastly, the judicial branch, which, as the name implies, handles the legal side of Federation society. Beginning in 2161, the founding members of the Federation included humans, Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, Denobulans, Regalians, and Corydonites. Admittance into the Federation does require a bit of bureaucracy to attain. After all, this is space politics. Either through invitation or petition, a planet can be absorbed into the Federation, after proving itself to be able to adhere and to uphold Federation principles. Along with this, a culture needs to have a baseline level of technology, in this case, faster-than-light travel capabilities. Each culture is allowed to maintain its practices so long as they do not interfere with core principles of the Federation: liberty, equality, peace, and justice. The Federation exists in what would be considered a post-scarcity society. The Federation does not operate with currency, at least on Earth. Due to their level of technology, such as food replicators being commonplace, it is the accumulation of knowledge and personal growth that citizens within the Federation strive for. People like Captain Kirk, Captain Picard, Commander Sisko, and Captain Janeway are shown to also be collectors of items they consider of interest to their hobbies. However, the Federation does not discourage or outlaw the use of currency-based trading, and has engaged in this with other civilizations. Specifically on Earth, however, most of the trade and barter systems humanity once used are all effectively extinct. Overall, the Federation has proven time and time again to be a force for good, though not without flaw. Starfleet. Starfleet serves as both the exploratory and military side of the Federation. Its main focus is discovery and knowledge accumulation, but is no stranger to military engagements. Starfleet is arguably the most prominent aspect of human culture, as well as Federation culture as a whole. It is the focus of all Star Trek-based media. Starfleet also holds a large amount of influence on the politics of the Federation. This is in large part due to the fact that Starfleet members tend to transition to the political field after their service. Starfleet has 3 divisions: Command, Science and Engineering, and Medical. The Command division is often made up of captains, first officers. Command usually focuses on leadership, military strategy, and diplomacy. Science and Engineering are the ones who fix the ship when it's broken, and figure out what kind of anomaly is causing problems with the ship to begin with. If your food replicator is cooking your steak wrong, you call an engineer. If the food replicator starts questioning existence, you call the science officer. Medical is arguably at the forefront of the final frontier. While the captain is exploring a strange nebula, the radiation exposure causing an ensign to grow unexpected appendages is being handled by the doctor. Romulan Star Empire. The Romulan Star Empire is one of the largest cultures in the known galaxy. Spanning a notable portion of the Beta Quadrant, the Romulan Empire commands a great deal of respect from not only the Federation, but also the Klingon Empire. Until around 2379, the Romulan Empire maintained a less than stellar relationship with the Federation, a sort of Cold War. Romulans stayed on their side of the neutral zone, and the Federation stayed on theirs. Romulans, known for their subversive political actions, would often try to provoke a war with the Federation, and even sided with the Dominion during the Dominion War, until evidence, albeit a forgery,
It's a fake!
convinced the Romulans to work against the Dominion. Just after the Dominion War, Shinzon of Remus orchestrated the assassination of the entire Romulan Senate, declaring himself Praetor, though his rule over the Empire was short-lived. What has become of the Romulan Empire post-Nemesis is unclear. And no, I don't care about any lore from the Kelvin timeline, Picard, or Star Trek Online. Klingon Empire. The Klingon Empire, like the Federation, occupies a considerable amount of the Alpha Quadrant. The Klingon Empire, unlike its counterparts, puts less emphasis on politics and focuses far more on military and direct combat. Operating officially as a feudal monarchy with a central leader, the High Council, consisting of 24 prominent house leaders, hold most of the actual power within the system. The Klingon Empire is also heavily dictated by a system of honor, which is mostly tied to combat and how a given Klingon warrior dies. Death in battle is seen as the greatest honor one can achieve in their life, and the honor it bestows upon the house that Klingon belonged to. The Klingon Empire would be adversarial against the Federation until at least 2293, after the Praxis disaster, when the Klingon moon of Praxis was destroyed from overmining its materials. The resulting pollution of the Klingon home world caused the Empire to redirect funding from its military to mitigating the environmental impact of the disaster. Due to the lack of military funding, the Klingon Empire would establish a peace treaty with the Federation, which was undone during the Dominion War. However, the Federation and Klingon Empire would join forces once again to help win said war, ultimately. Borg Space. Borg Space is a section of the Delta Quadrant which contains thousands of solar systems, along with millions of Borg vessels. The USS Voyager, on its journey back to the Alpha Quadrant, found itself in the heart of Borg Space. However, due to the actions of Species 8472, the Borg had a corridor within their domain effectively cleared out by the attacks of the relatively unknown species. The results of future Janeway's actions against the Borg Queen are also not fully known, or how it affected Borg space as a whole. Humans. Humans, originating from the planet Earth, are one of the predominant and founding species that makes up the Federation. While not the oldest civilization in the known galaxy, humans have been one of the most impactful. We'll talk about why that is later. Despite the many issues humanity faced with itself, such as the eugenics wars, a second civil war, and finally ending in World War III, humanity was able to persevere after achieving warp capabilities on April 5th, 2063. Humanity made first contact with Vulcans, who would help spur on technological development and the unification of mankind. Humanity's overall role in the events of the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma Quadrant cannot be understated, even with the limited human exposure to the Delta Quadrant. Despite the fact that humans are relatively weak when compared to species like Vulcans and Klingons, they have carved out a place for themselves in the galaxy. Vulcans. Vulcans, commonly accepted to have originated from the planet Vulcan, are humanoid species that share many similarities with humanity and Romulans in both appearance and early culture. Romulans are most noted for their calm, logical personalities. However, this was not always the case. Prior to the awakening, Vulcans were just as, if not more violent than human civilization. Vulcans waged many wars, including nuclear warfare, that drove them to near extinction. However, the philosophies of Surak were able to save the Vulcan people, encouraging logic over emotions. Vulcans are capable of telepathy, though seemingly limited to mind melds, which require physical touch, though many edge cases have shown that they can telepathically communicate with beings without physical interactions, if the connection is strong enough. Vulcans also possess greater natural strength than humans. One common misconception about Vulcans is that they are emotionless. Rather, they learn to control their emotions to such a degree that it can appear that they are emotionless, when in reality, they just keep them in check, lest they return to their intense, often violent ways. Adult male Vulcans are noted for going through what is known as the Pon farr, a mating period which is accompanied by intense and primal emotions. This period is so emotionally intense that it can in fact kill a Vulcan if they do not receive some form of release during it. That's one hell of a pickup line. Listen, if you don't have sex with me, I will literally die. While first known contact with humans was in 2063, thanks to time travel, first contact could be considered in the 1930s, when Kirk and Spock were sent back to Depression-era New York City. 20 years later, a more timeline natural contact was technically made in 1957 when a Vulcan survey ship crash-landed on Earth, though the crew of the ship disguised themselves as humans. Klingons. The other ones. Originating from Kronos, are a species of humanoids that are seemingly built for combat, described as having multiple redundant organs and bones, such as 23 ribs, organized in a honeycomb-like structure, 2 livers, an 8-chambered heart, 3 lungs, 2 urinary tracts, and 4 testicles.
7 vaginas.
To pour salt on the wound, they also have superior strength to humans. Klingon culture seems to have remained fairly consistent throughout its existence, predominantly ruled by their honor system, as well as having an ingrained hierarchy of houses that dictate many of the politics in the Klingon Empire. As for why Klingons look different in TOS compared to TNG, well, the in-lore reason, established by Enterprise, Klingons attempted to use the human knowledge of genetic augmentation on themselves. While some improvements were seen, genetic degradation became apparent. On top of this, a mutated strain of Levodian flu began to infect large swaths of the Klingon Empire, which caused their trademark forehead ridges to disappear. This effect became genetic and passed down to their offspring as well. A cure was developed and distributed at some point throughout the Klingon Empire. First contact would take place in 2151, when a Klingon vessel would crash land in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Unfortunately, this first contact scenario was considered disastrous and led to decades of war between humanity and Klingons. Romulans. Romulans, originating from the planet Romulus, are a species with a common ancestor to that of Vulcans. Romulan society is highly militaristic and political, borderlining on a form of fascist totalitarianism. While they do possess a senate that controls the government, due to the importance they put on preserving the Romulan Empire, questioning these ideals is considered traitorous. On top of this, their social structure operates on a caste system, where those who occupy high military ranks are considered more valuable than those who don't. Romulan society still uses slave labor, in the case of the inhabitants of Remus. As well as this, they display xenophobia to non-Romulans, which has resulted in long periods of isolationism. To add to the paranoia of Romulan culture, they have a secret military organization called the Tal Shiar. The human equivalent would be Section 31. They, like the Vulcans, set aside their violent tendencies, but rather than a focus on logic and peace, they often turn to underhanded tactics to achieve their political goals. It wouldn't be until the events of Star Trek Nemesis that the Romulan Empire would at least become more tolerant of the Federation, after the crew of the Enterprise aided in killing self-elected Praetor Shinzon. Risa. This is where the fun begins. Risa is the Federation-approved sex tourist location, a pleasure planet. It's right there in the wiki. Modern-day Risa shares many geological, environmental, and biological elements to Earth. The planet is a prime location for humans to visit. It contains a native humanoid species, seemingly as advanced as the rest of the Federation. Risa's past, however, was a different story. A dismal, constant rain-soaked place. The UK, and geologically unstable, while also covered in dense jungles. The Risan surface would be reformed into the paradise that it's known for, using weather control systems as well as seismic regulators. The native inhabitants of Risa are tailor-made to make the planet a paradise for people like Captain Kirk, William Riker, Julian Bashir, and maybe even Tom Paris. The first instance of human contact with the planet would be when the NX-01 used the planet for a 2-day shore leave. It was probably hard to get the crew back on board after that. Risa, while being a peaceful planet, is no stranger to criminal activity, given that it is a galactic tourist location. Nearly all episodes that take place on Risa usually have some kind of criminal plot going on as well. Ferengi. The Ferengi, originating from the planet Ferenginar, are a species of humanoids most distinctly recognized by their large ears and visible cranial lobes. The Ferengi are a heavily profit-driven species, who see life through the filter of gold-pressed latinum. The Ferengi social hierarchy is mostly classed by profit level. How much currency one commands gives them more authority and importance in Ferengi culture. At the top of their society is the Grand Nagus, the man who has the final say on all decisions that affect the Ferengi Alliance across the known galaxy. Though in 2375, Rom, brother of Quark, was named Grand Nagus and brought with him massive reforms that limited the Nagus' power. Of course, contrasting Federation society was how the Ferengi treated their women. Not only are they forbidden from earning profits, they are not allowed to leave the homeworld, nor wear clothing. However, due to social reforms by, at the time, Grand Nagus Zek, females were able to wear clothing by at least 2381. First contact from the Ferengi, like others on this list, is complicated. Unofficial contact occurred in 1947, when Quark, his brother Rom, and Rom's son, Nog, would be sent back in time, and would accidentally cause the Roswell incident. Semi-first contact would be in 2151, when Ferengi sedated the entire crew of the NX-01 Enterprise, save for the lead engineer. True first contact would be a hostile one that took place in 2364, when the Enterprise D became trapped in orbit of an outpost planet of the long-dead Deccan Empire. Despite the attacks on Starfleet personnel during this encounter, the Federation never declared war on the Ferengi, nor seemed interested in pursuing any kind of retaliatory efforts. Either the Federation has no spine, or the Ferengi are viewed as that much of a non-issue. The Q Continuum is a mysterious group that is also technically one. Don't worry, it gets more confusing from here. Officially, first contact in the 23rd century with Picard, though speculation suggests an encounter with the Q as early as the 22nd century with Kirk's Enterprise. Though, if you want to get super technical, humanity encountered the Q while still a primordial ooze. There are at least 5 Q that the Federation have had direct dealings with. Q, 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 and, most infamously, Q. While presenting as individual forms, The Q Continuum have a shared knowledge, though individual Q do have self-autonomy, given that each one presents with different personalities, ranging from chaotically good to true neutral to neutral evil. Though given that punishment has been exacted on some Q for their less than stellar behavior, such as when Q was turned human for a few days, this implies that the Continuum have some form of code of ethics. The Q possibly are not completely omniscient, given that they've shown fear to the thought of Q members reproducing. This may be proof that the Q, while hyper-intelligent and able to predict outcomes of events with incredibly high certainty, perhaps they do not possess the ability to see the future fully. Some fan speculation is that the Q are the result of a race achieving an incredibly high state of technology, and this is why Q is testing humanity to see if they're worthy of becoming the same level as them, or why they're so hesitant on provoking the Borg. The Q Continuum has what appears to be flawless control over the fabric of the universe, capable of making changes according to their whim. Some of the feats of the Q include instant teleportation, altering clothing, mind control, altering physics, altering biology, time travel, and possibly even influence within what the Star Trek universe might consider the afterlife. Personally, what I think is most interesting about the Q is the meta aspect of what they are in the story itself. In the original series, there were plenty of characters that seemed to have control over reality, but it usually turned out to be smoke and mirrors and technology, or they possessed abilities like telekinesis or telepathy that they used in such a way that looked like magic. However, in the next generation, the Q don't feel like an original series race of the weak that has strange abilities, but that's a result of not only using the Q more often than just a one-off oddity, but also giving more world building and structure to them than just race that can manipulate reality. It also helps that most Q episodes don't solely center around the Q, despite being the most powerful race in existence. They're almost a B-plot in the episodes they feature in. And despite my tism when it comes to comedic relief in otherwise serious plots, Q characters are usually the only ones who are committing this act, while everyone else is in fact taking things more seriously, and the Q are detached from it all. I know that in the next episode, things will carry on as normal, and this was a fun departure from the norm for 40 minutes. Prime Directive.
I think here's a good boner like the Prime Directive.
The Prime Directive is a governing principle within Starfleet, dictating how the Federation interacts with other species, while open to some level of interpretation and allowing for very limited flexibility. Normally, the Prime Directive dictates that Starfleet cannot interfere with the culture or societies of non-Federation civilizations. They can observe silently, but are restricted from direct interactions that would make the society aware of the fact that they're dealing with an interstellar space collective. If a civilization has already achieved faster-than-light travel, the Federation is less strict with their rules of engagement. It's commonly accepted that a society that has warp capabilities will encounter alien species eventually, so interactions with the Federation are inevitable, rather than speculative. One aspect of the Prime Directive that sometimes can get lost in the details is how it's used when dealing with non-Federation civilizations, such as when Captain Picard dealt with the Brekkian-Onarian situation. Despite the fact that these were both spacefaring civilizations, ultimately, Picard chose to use the Prime Directive to cease Federation involvement with the social conflict, forcing the two cultures to deal with their problems themselves, rather than trying to solve it with Starfleet intervention. This situation will be covered in more depth later on. Now, whether or not this was a result of a somewhat unseasoned Picard, or the rules of the Prime Directive being relaxed, later Prime Directive situations would result in the crew of the Enterprise becoming much more involved in non-Federation cultures, and even non-warp societies. And the legal repercussions of these situations didn't seem to fall onto the crew in any notable way. Prime Directive, more like Prime Suggestions. Warp. Warp is Star Trek's answer to faster-than-light travel. However, it's not the ship moving, it's space-time. The nacelles generate a warp field that bends space-time into an asymmetric bubble. Space compresses ahead of the ship and expands behind it. The plumbers in the audience will understand this principle. The vessel just sits still, relative to the local space-time inside that bubble, and rides the wave. Since the ship isn't technically locally exceeding light speed, occupants don't experience the relativistic effects, time dilation, crushing inertia, etc. The field itself works by manipulating subspace, a parallel dimension layered against normal space that is also used by faster-than-light sensors and communications. Warp travel is essentially surfing a manufactured seam between the two. First human warp flight was achieved by Zefram Cochrane on April 5, 2063, only about 10 years after World War III. First contact with aliens, Vulcans, would be made shortly after this flight, after which humanity began experimenting with faster warp technology, and by the time of the Enterprise D, humanity had achieved Warp 9.9. This of course implies that Warp 9.9 is the limit to travel speeds. As with the case of Tom Paris, achieving Warp 10 puts one at infinite velocity and causes changes to one's physiology that'll be talked about later. Some ideas were explored regarding warp, such as the concept of it causing damage to subspace, rendering warp travel impossible. However, due to the fact that the entire series relies on being able to travel long distances in shorter time frames, this concept was dropped like a bad habit. There are some species, namely the Borg, who use transwarp, a series of pre-existing subspace conduits, allowing for near-instantaneous travel. Transwarp almost acts more like wormholes. And of course you have one-off FTL methods like the Traveler and Kess, who are both able to propel the ships they were on vast distances in a matter of seconds. Mirror Universe. The Mirror Universe is an alternate reality to the timeline shown in Star Trek. Within it, alternate versions of nearly every aspect of the Prime timeline exists. However, the people within the Mirror Universe are nearly exact polar opposites to their Prime counterparts, being what would be considered to us as evil. Interestingly, despite how different the Mirror Universe is in terms of its occupants' behaviors, many of the same people exist, and similar events still took place. First contact in the Mirror Universe ended far more violently, however, with Zefram Cochrane killing the Vulcan captain along with the other crew members. The Terran Empire would go on to conquer Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, Denobulans, and the Orions. It wouldn't be until the time of Kirk's Enterprise that Spock becomes the leader of the Terran Empire, reforming it into a far more peaceful civilization. However, due to this more peaceful state, the Terran Empire is unprepared for the Klingon-Cardassian alliance, which would lead to the enslavement of humanity. However, by the time of DS9, the Terran Rebellion begins, the results of which are unknown, though speculated to be a positive win for the Rebellion on all fronts. Tip of the Berg. Information that many will know, but a closer look reveals things you didn't think about at first. What culture pretends this is deep lore? Eugenics Wars. The Eugenics Wars was a period in human history spanning the late 1900s into the early 2000s. Through selective breeding and genetic engineering, humanity sought to advance themselves through technology rather than ideology. The resulting war would devastate parts of Earth. The leader of what were known as the Augmented, Khan Noonien Singh, took control over most of Asia and the Middle East. Other Augmented took inspiration from Khan's conquest and seized power within 40 other nations, enslaving most of the non-augmented people in those regions. Khan's empire seemed to enjoy more peace than those of other controlled nations, attempting to maintain a gentle authoritarianism. It's unknown whether the wars were started by humanity rising up against figures like Khan, or if infighting between various augmented controlled nations occurred. Whatever the case is, the eugenics wars would ultimately result in the banning of genetic manipulation. Government authorities, without public knowledge, placed augmented embryos into cold storage, presumably for possible later use. The eugenics wars would eventually lead to World War III. Kevin Uxbridge. Kevin Uxbridge is a life form known as a Dowd, which seemingly has nigh unlimited powers, very similar to the Q. While his true form seems to be that of pure energy, Kevin took the appearance as a human on Earth. After meeting, and within 2 hours of said meeting, marrying Rashawn, a human woman, the two would move to Federation colony Rana 4. In 2366, 6 years after moving to the colony, the planet came under attack by the alien race known as the Husnock, a violent and aggressive species. Despite the assault, the Dowd moral code prevented Kevin from taking any violent action against the species. Despite his attempts to dissuade their attacks through deception, every colonist on Rana 4 would be killed by the Husnock, including Kevin's wife. In a moment of sheer rage, Kevin used his power to wipe out the entire Husnock species from the universe. 50 billion members of the species were eradicated in one moment. Of course, the biggest question is, what are the Dowd? I theorize they are a species closing the gap on becoming a Q-like group. The fact that one Dowd can erase an entire species across tens of thousands of light years at once implies they have access to an energy source, or are a source of conscious energy that spans the entire galaxy, or is coded into the universe itself. In the 10th entry of the Titan book series, the Husnock are described as blue-blooded, beaked non-humanoids, possessing 7 tentacle-like appendages, and just before their deaths, it is described that they experienced excruciating pain before bursting into flames, reducing to ash. Whatever the case is, given that the Husnock are known to be an aggressive, murderous species, perhaps Kevin, despite his guilt, did the galaxy a favor. After all, the only good Husnock is a dead one, and now there are about 50 billion good ones. The Omega Molecule. The Omega Molecule is a highly unstable substance, originally intended to be used as a source of intense power to fuel the Federation. It has the unfortunate property that if destabilized, will explode, destroying subspace, and preventing all warp travel within a several light-year radius. Capable of being created with adequate amounts of boronite, but no proper containment methods existing, the Federation, after an accident involving the molecule and the destruction of the classified research station, along with all scientists working on it, banned all production and research on the molecule, going so far as to order the destruction of any Omega molecule any Starfleet vessel encounters. The order to destroy this substance even supersedes the Prime Directive. The Borg, on the other hand, strive to assimilate it, despite their own experimentations with it, that also resulted in the destruction of 29 Borg vessels. The Borg created a harmonic resonance chamber, theorized to be capable of storing the molecule, but unable to accumulate enough boronite to make another molecule, the Borg were left to continue their search for more. In 2374, in the Delta Quadrant, the civilization was not only able to produce, but stabilize 200 million Omega molecules, using its own resonance frequency, though an accident within the research station devastated it. Voyager was able to destroy the molecules, using a gravimetric torpedo and jumping to warp before subspace within that region would be destroyed. 7 of 9 was able to adapt the Borg resonance chamber and use an inverse frequency, which caused spontaneous stabilization within the molecule for 3.2 seconds before the chamber was ultimately ejected into space and destroyed along with the rest of the molecules. The Xindi. The Xindi was a collective of 6 species, which all evolved on the same planet, Xindus, despite the radically different appearances. The Xindi consisted of the primate race, the arboreal race, the reptilian race, the insectoid race, and the aquatic race, with a long-extinct avian race as well. They all competed for dominance over each other until the destruction of their home world in the 2030s, caused by the insectoids and reptilians. In 2153, a Xindi prototype weapon came into low orbit, firing a beam of energy which devastated several hundred to a few thousand miles of the surface, from southern Florida through to Venezuela. The total death count ranged upwards of 7 million people. After this attack, humanity sent the Enterprise to figure out why the weapon was created and used against them. The resulting investigation showed that the weapon used technology from 420 years in the future. After making contact with the Xindi, Captain Archer discovered that the Xindi were being used as puppets by an interdimensional race of sphere builders who convinced them that humanity would destroy the new Xindi homeworld in the 26th century. Captain Archer was able to convince 3 of the 5 races to end their hostilities towards humanity. Ultimately, the primate, arboreal, and aquatic races would aid humanity in stopping the primary weapon, intended to obliterate Earth. A little side tangent about this episode that kicked off this entire arc. With Enterprise having started September 26, 2001, and this being Season 3, being aired in 2003, 2 years after the World Trade Center, it's easy to see that this event within the Star Trek universe was inspired by the events of 9/11. Star Trek has a long history of taking real-world events, even relatively new ones, and using them as inspiration for plot lines and episodes, with varying degrees of subtlety.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
You're black on one side and white on the other.
I am black on the right side.
Fail to see the significant difference.
Lokai is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side.
Transporter kills you. The transporter killing you is a classic theory in Star Trek. So how the transporters work is that they dematerialize you, converting your entire body mass into energy, then reassembling you at the location you've been sent to. This, of course, means that the transporter is disassembling your entire body, atom by atom, converting it to a completely different state of existence, then stitching you back together on the other side. The question is it the same you before you transported? Or did the original you die, and what's walking around now is a simulation of you? Yes, you have all the same thoughts, memories, and decision-making as you did before you transported, but is it the true version of you? Or is the transporter reassembling a different version? This question gets into a lot of metaphysics and philosophical tomfoolery. If you believe in the spirit, does that still exist after you've transported, or does it consider your body being completely taken apart, spread over space-time, as your death, and is released? This also enters into the territory of the ship of Theseus. If your entire body is disassembled, then reassembled one-to-one, but with new material, is it still the same you? Given all the various transportation mishaps in the show, including that of creating a duplicate of Riker, imprisoning the energy signatures of an entire ship's crew in the data stream, making them into transporter worms, sending people's energy signatures into the holodeck and quite literally forcing them to act and behave like characters inside the story playing out, or even combining 2 people into one entity. All I know is that I think I'll take a shuttlecraft. Section 31. Section 31 is a secret intelligence agency within Starfleet, though not recognized by the Federation. First revealed during the events of DS9, Section 31 was founded in the 2140s, coinciding with the inception of Starfleet. Based on a line within the Code of Starfleet, Article 14, Section 31, granting extraordinary power in times of crisis. Section 31 operates within the shadow of the Federation, carrying out secret missions against their enemies, and without any kind of oversight or accountability regarding their tactics, with agents potentially at every level of Starfleet and the Federation. Section 31 became one of the largest showcases that the Federation is not 100% forthright with their utopian philosophies. While this agency doesn't fully break the idealism of the Federation, it does serve as a stain on the reputation. However, Section 31 ultimately believes to act for the good of the Federation and its people. Can the Federation survive without Section 31? Absolutely. But perhaps a hand that is willing to get dirty so that the other can stay clean is a necessary sacrifice. During the Dominion War, possibly Section 31's greatest example of how powerful they really are, developed a virus capable of destroying the changeling species, which was nearly successful. Unfortunately, Section 31 and its consequences have been an absolute disaster for Star Trek.
A green-blooded shapeshifter trying to muster sexy time with a Delta.
Yeah, hi. Quick question. Sorry. Yeah, no, it's just a quick one. Is it Godsend or Godsend? Godsend? Godsend.
Yeah, I'm still not getting it.
The godsend
Wait, Godsend. I hear it now.
Every hack Hollywood writer misuses Section 31 for their pseudo-intellectual,
Hey guys, what if like the Federation is actually a really dark and dystopian society because they got space CIA?
That vision of the future, that optimistic utopia, isn't possible without people operating in the shadows to make it possible.
I have enough loyal officers to make a fight of it.
Who will you fight? Starfleet? The Federation? Don't you see, Admiral? You're fighting the wrong war.
One example of an agency that uses cloak and dagger tactics does not invalidate the rest of the near-utopian society. Ancient humanoids. The ancient humanoids are considered to be the first evolved species within the Milky Way galaxy, having existed some billions of years prior to the Federation. They seeded countless planets with their genetic information in an attempt to give life to a galaxy that was empty at the time of their exploration. This seeding would also act as a continued proof of their existence. The implication of this discovery is technically galaxy-shattering, given that it means every known humanoid species in the galaxy so far share a common ancestor, which you would think would cause some amount of unity, like the ancestors hoped it would. But
That's all? If she were not dead, I would kill her.
The very notion that a Cardassian could have anything in common with a Klingon, it turns my stomach.
And if the Federation had existed at the time they performed the seeding, I'm sure Picard would have had a magnitude-sized aneurysm, given that this would be one of the biggest violations of the Prime Directive known to history. Of course, from a writer's side of things, this was done to explain why nearly every alien species encountered in Star Trek had similar features as humans. Fun fact, the projection of the ancient humanoid was played by the same woman who portrayed the female changeling from DS9, Salome Jens. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. I wouldn't be surprised if the look of the ancient humanoids were the inspiration for the look of the changelings as well. World War III. World War III took place sometime in the mid-21st century, following the eugenics wars. However, World War III was not denoted by a singular, short-lived nuclear exchange. It lasted for years, with political collapse, social disintegration, various genocides, and some amount of nuclear warfare. Star Trek First Contact shows us humanity still recovering from the war. Despite the poverty, destruction, and lack of organized government, the most profound event in human history would occur only 10 years after the end of World War III, with the invention of the warp drive and subsequent first contact with aliens. At humanity's lowest point, it was able to rise from its own destruction and reach for the stars. If you ever wanted to know why current Star Trek sucks, it's because modern writers don't understand that one line of philosophy, or at least they're far too cynical to take it seriously. Species 8472. Species 8472, a designation given by the Borg, later identified as the Undine, were an extremely resilient, non-humanoid species encountered during the events of Star Trek Voyager. Unlike nearly every major civilization in the Milky Way galaxy, Species 8472 did not originate from what would be considered normal space, but from a separate dimension known as fluidic space. Their biology, technology, and even their methods of travel are completely alien compared to anything previously encountered by the Federation or the Borg. Initial attempts by the Borg to assimilate the species failed, as 8472 possessed an immune system and genetic structure resilient to assimilation. 8472 became such a drastic threat to the Borg, destroying entire fleets, they were forced to accept Voyager's allyship in order to deal with the threat that they ironically caused by opening a portal to fluidic space. Voyager would successfully create a nanotechnology-based counterweapon against 8472, and while they appeared hostile to all life in the galaxy, it would seem that their aggression stemmed from what they viewed as an impure galaxy spilling into theirs. However, 8472 was shown to possess high enough intelligence to not only simulate human society, but conduct diplomacy with the Voyager, giving the species a less hostile view of humanity. The Borg war against 8472 would conclude with the nanotech countermeasure, forcing the species back into fluidic space. Red shirts. Red shirts is one of the longest standing memes in the Star Trek fandom, and spilling over into pop culture in general. In early Star Trek, specifically TOS, many unnamed security crew members would die during away missions. At this time in Starfleet's history, security and engineering wore red shirts. If there was an unnamed red shirt alongside the main characters during a mission, there was almost no doubt they would be killed. At that point in time, Starfleet did not issue plot armor alongside the red shirts. Nagilum. Nagilum is best described as a non-corporeal, extra-dimensional entity, which seems to exist within a sort of pocket dimension and has near full control of space-time and physics within it. Encountered by the Enterprise, Nagilum proceeded to experiment with the crew of the ship, first by not allowing them to escape the pocket dimension, then by creating a duplicate of the Enterprise. After direct contact was established with the being, Nagilum showed interest in the experience of human life and death, killing one crew member near instantly, and with further plans to kill more of the crew to gather more information. While on the surface, Nagilum would be considered evil, his tone and view of the situation is more that of a detached scientist. He seemed to have no particular malice or ill will towards the crew, but viewed them more as test subjects than actual individuals. Ultimately, Nagilum released the Enterprise from his pocket dimension after Picard initiated the self-destruct sequence of the ship, and following a conversation with Picard using the projection of Data and Troy to inquire about the nature of death. Subsurface. Entries here reside in the realm of geek lore. These are the topics that are the reason you don't get invited to parties. Tom Paris Theory. The Tom Paris Theory is a fan theory centered around the Voyager pilot Tom Paris, whose actor, Robert Duncan McNeil, also appeared in The Next Generation, though playing supposedly a different character, Nick Locarno. Both Nick and Tom share very similar personalities. They're both skilled pilots who were involved in fatal accidents involving their profession, attempts to cover up the incident, and both suffered disciplinary action that caused them to become disillusioned with Starfleet. The theory suggests that Tom Paris entered Starfleet Academy under a different name, Nick Locarno, to avoid unwanted attention with the Paris surname, given his dad's position as an admiral. It's possible Tom didn't want to be held to certain expectations due to his father's reputation, and wanted to make a name for himself. Literally. However, after the incident, it's theorized that Owen Paris, using his position, ordered Starfleet to alter the records and had his son's real name edited into the databases without the incident tied to it, and let the name of Nick Locarno become the fall guy. Though why Tom Paris would be in prison still for this incident doesn't make a whole lot of sense, unless another similar event occurred later on that caused him to face punishment, and this time they couldn't get away with a false identity taking the blame. Overall, this theory is shaky at best, and based off the fact that two characters are played by one actor, and both have somewhat similar histories. Matter energy. In the Star Trek universe, the Federation has, by all measures, essentially mastered the relationship between matter and energy, able to convert one to the other by just a few clicks of a terminal. What this means is that Federation technology can separate matter down to its most basic building blocks, not down to the molecular level, not even the atomic level. No, they can go down to the protons, neutrons, and electrons, subatomic, if you want to call it that. The fact that they can replicate all states of matter and also transport it across distances means that their technology can assemble atoms, then combine them into molecules and combine enough molecules to form recognizable matter. There's a reason their energy source has to be matter-antimatter reactions. Fusion, while powerful, would be stressed to its absolute limits when you start tearing apart atoms and reassembling them. I mean, that's kind of what fusion is to begin with. Slamming particles together, causing them to fuse, which releases a ton of heat energy, which is then used to boil water, and you know the rest, because that's what nuclear fission reactors do. Listen, we never truly advanced past steam-powered technology. It just doesn't look like brass and wood stoves anymore. Let's not forget that the Federation also has artificial gravity, which at their level is just casual manipulation of space-time. You ain't making artificial gravity on steam power, I can tell you that. Alien abductions still happening. Ironically, despite several hundred years of warp-capable exploration, highly advanced weapons, and the casual manipulation of matter and energy, Starfleet personnel are still subject to age-old issues, such as alien abductions. In the TNG episode, Schisms, the crew of the USS Enterprise begin experiencing strange lapses in memory, unexplained exhaustion, and growing paranoia among several officers, including Riker and Worf, as well as a helmsman. At first, the incidents seem unrelated, but the affected crew members gradually uncover fragments of a terrifying shared experience. They are being abducted during the night by unseen beings and taken into a strange alien operating room, where painful medical experiments are performed on them. As more details emerge through hypnosis and holodeck reconstructions, the crew realizes the abductors are interdimensional aliens phasing through normal space, making them almost impossible to detect. Another example of alien abduction happens in the episode Allegiance. Captain Picard is suddenly abducted from the Enterprise and imprisoned in a single-room cell, alongside 3 strangers from different species. None of them understand why they were taken, and tensions quickly rise as fear, suspicion, and cultural differences begin to fracture the group. As they struggle to survive and uncover the purpose behind their captivity, the prisoners slowly realize that they are subjects in a bizarre experiment conducted by an unknown alien race attempting to study how different species react under stress and confinement. And the resolution to these problems are situational at best. There is no standard operation procedure for alien abductions, given that if a species is able to bypass Starfleet weapons and defenses, the abductee will have to wait for the science and engineering crew to pull a new solution out of thin air and hope that it actually works. each morning you wake up still in your quarters would be a miracle. If it wasn't for the smoking hot crew members, Starfleet ships would be a constant source of existential dread. Then again, you could just request a position on Risa, like missionary. Federation cover-ups. Despite the transparent utopian nature of the Federation, especially established in the original series and most of TNG, the Federation does indeed have a cloak and dagger element to its functionality, that while is not the defining feature of its existence, is a blemish on its reputation. Section 31 being the largest example of their willingness to cover up unsanctioned actions. Other examples include the Pegasus incident, involving a phase-cloaking ship that violated the Algeron Treaty between the Federation and the Romulans. It wouldn't be until Picard became privy to the incident some 12 years later that Starfleet was forced to acknowledge it, after silencing survivors and erasing documentation. The alien parasites which infiltrated some of Starfleet's highest levels of command, yet it was never talked about again in any form. Or, possibly, the most extensive cover-up being that of the Omega Directive, which, as previously covered, orders any Starfleet captain that encounters the Omega molecule to destroy it immediately. Now, while this paints the Federation as no longer the perfect utopia that it might have otherwise been set up as in earlier depictions, it does not disqualify them from being a free and fair society. No system is without fault, but it is the mitigation of those faults that matter most. Warp 10. Warp 10 is a theoretical limit to travel speeds within the Star Trek universe, representing a threshold beyond known warp physics. First experienced by Tom Paris aboard a modified Delta Flyer, Warp 10 is considered to be the point at which one experiences infinite velocity, putting the traveler at any point of space-time simultaneously. However, the effects of Warp 10 have an unfortunate problem of causing the traveler to begin to experience drastic physiological changes, or, in some descriptions, evolve so quickly that they loop back around into a more primordial state. Although, the holographic doctor aboard Voyager was able to develop a cure to these effects, which renders Warp 10 travel technically safe. It's possible that this is one of the other cover-ups that the Federation has performed, suppressing research into Warp 10, given that it would render travel distances irrelevant, causing all known territorial lines to be null. On top of this, the effects of Warp 10 causing drastic mutations to a given traveler implies that at a certain point, humanoid biology simply cannot handle physics outside of known causality. The philosophical implications of a hard limit on humanoid physics would possibly cause cultural ripples throughout Federation society, knowing that there are some boundaries that cannot be broken. This could result in some kind of cultural stagnation, which is actually a topic further down. Star Trek is secretly a humanity fuck yeah story. This one is blatantly obvious. Yes, Star Trek is humanity fuck yeah, but possibly the earliest known example. If you aren't familiar, Humanity Fuck Yeah is a genre of online stories that center around humanity and their place in the universe amongst other alien races. Usually the story can be summed up as, humanity is squishy, vulnerable, and weak, until the super duper special chemical that apparently no other race has kicks in, adrenaline. Once that pesky chemical comes into play, suddenly humans become the main characters and lead the fight into a hopeless battle, turning the tides and slapping their dicks down on the negotiation table. Star Trek, while it follows a lot of the same ideas, was the first to really do it, and at least it was written fairly well. Aliens are usually portrayed as a single personality trait, while humans come in to balance things out and enlighten the different species about how the Terran way is the best way. Nearly every major conflict in Star Trek is solved by humans, and the Federation itself was started by humanity, with the aid of Vulcans. Of course, this is what happens when you have a series written by humans, for humans. We're biased to ourselves. What a concept. 1900s through 2050s culture doesn't exist anymore. In Star Trek, Starfleet personnel tend to have interests in art dating back to the mid and early 1900s and earlier. They listen to classical music, read literature from antiquity, and the only latest cultural reference anyone seems to have is Cisco and his obsession with baseball. Specifically, the player Buck Bokai, who played baseball in possibly the late 1900s. However, culture from most of that time period seems to be almost completely absent, and this is well before the eugenics wars and World War III. Now, this could be evidence that World War III caused massive losses to archived human culture, and what's left is what we see in the series, meaning that over 100 years of human culture was destroyed, if not more. Which is an intensely dread-inducing idea to me, that artistically, humanity is stuck in the 1930s, possibly, and they don't really seem to be moving on. This feeds into the next idea that humans don't seem to be progressing in terms of art. No one seems to really make holodeck programs based around modern events or modern fiction. It always seems to be programs based off of ideas from the 1900s, classic detective novels, Wild West encounters, and, at the earliest, 50s to 60s era science fiction. It might just be that what we see are people who are particularly interested in antiquity, and that the broader Federation does have modern writers, artists, and holodeck programmers that are creating modern works of art that pertain to contemporary subjects. Contemporary for the 24th century. But then again, there is the other explanation to this culture gap. Star Trek was a series that didn't have the budget to license out popular music or media from the era it was made in, and it would be really weird to have a character like Picard listening to Metallica.
This is Captain Picard. To whom am I speaking?
Ralph Offenhouse. I need to talk to you.
What is going on here, everyone?
Bottom of the Berg. Topics here are where you stop being a casual nerd and start trekking into the realm of irredeemable. Quark's Bar. Quark's Bar is one of the iconic places of Deep Space Nine, and one of the places that sparks a strange question when you start to think about it. How does Starfleet personnel pay? While the many non-Federation patrons of the bar most likely use currencies such as gold press latinum, we know that Starfleet operates under the same system that the Federation does. There is no currency. So again, how do they pay at Quark's Bar? Well, I have a few ideas. The first, most likely, is that the Federation gives Quark a regular donation of currency to allow Starfleet personnel and Federation civilians to have service at the bar. 2. Starfleet personnel are allowed a certain quantity of currency from their replicators in order to buy things at Quark's Bar. There would have to be a limit on the amount of money they can create as to not collapse the economy at the bar. 3. The least likely scenario. Quark, out of sheer generosity, allows Starfleet to freely order food and drink from his bar, though not without usage limits. 4. Perhaps Quark makes enough from non-Federation patronage that he tanks the cost of Starfleet using his bar for free, given the fact that they are the ones keeping the base sovereign, allowing Quark to even have a business there in the first place. None of these are fully outside the realm of possibility. While the Federation doesn't use currency within its own borders, they're intelligent enough to still understand how economies work in non-Federation systems. The other possibility is, shut up, stop thinking about it, and enjoy the story. Holodeck Technicalities. Holodeck Technicalities is all about the incredibly uncomfortable question that the holodeck raises. The holodeck is a matter-energy converter. Upon request, the holodeck will create solids, gases, liquids, and plasma, arrange them into nearly any form you can describe, and create a simulated reality. Everything in the holodeck is real, in the sense that you can physically interact with it, but the matter arranged by the holodeck cannot exist outside the area of the deck. The matter is specific to the holodeck, and can only maintain its form within the energy field that is forming it. However, there are a few things about the holodeck that begin to raise moral, ethical, and physical questions. First, food. That's the easiest one. The holodeck just has food replicators a part of its functionality. This allows it to generate the same food that one would get from the replicators in their quarters. This could also be applied to creating permanent objects that the replicators can also make. Second, human waste. Presumably, the holodeck is used for all manner of things. We're talking parties, reenactment, plays, and leisure. Surely, during holodeck use, someone has needed to go to the bathroom. Does the holodeck, convert waste into energy? I mean, everything on board a ship like this is recycled. The question is, if the holodeck is capable of disposing of human waste, is it capable of disposing of humans in general? Could the holodecks become the perfect body disposal site? Third, what are the moral implications of the holodeck, if it has any? While I'm not going to cover a certain topic, because I really don't feel like talking about that one, what I will do is ask the question of, can the holodeck be used to simulate murdering a real-world person? Would it allow you to even simulate a real person?
This is a violation of protocol. Crew members should not be simulated in the holodeck.
Commander, I don't think there's any regulation against...
Well, there ought to be.
And would it allow you to simulate killing them? The first issue is simulating a real person, and the compromising things you could make them do. It is shown that Barclay does in fact simulate the crew of the Enterprise D, as well as the crew of the Voyager. So clearly the holodeck does allow you to simulate real people. The implications of that are worrisome. The second, simulating killing them. Would this be considered a red flag scenario, or just living out a fantasy? If one did try to live out a murder simulation, and it is illegal, does the holodeck deny access to such a program and alert the authorities? Or does it let you go through with it and maintain your privacy? Another issue with the holodeck that is only mildly explored is how realistic it can be, and the fact that this could easily become somewhere many would lose their sense of reality. Psychosis would possibly skyrocket with the people who would prefer to spend all their time in a holodeck, in full control of reality, bending it to their whim. We do see that good old Barclay did have an obsession with the holodeck, but through the support of friends, namely Troy, he was able to give it up. There is one cop-out answer to this. The Federation, due to how well off nearly all citizens are, and the philosophies that are instilled within them, they do not possess these characteristics that would lead to morally bankrupt uses of holodecks. This is another one of those, don't think about it and enjoy the story. Seriously, don't think about it. Edo Prime Directive violation. After being tortured with a Season 1 episode, Justice, it occurred to me that this is a Prime Directive episode, but not one where Picard and the crew put their lives in danger to try and keep a race of people from finding out about the Federation and Starfleet. No, instead Picard seems to willingly violate the Prime Directive himself. After Wesley Crusher commits the indefensible crime of crushing some plants, this is a script from the 60s, he is held as prisoner of the Edo people. But here's the problem. The Edo people seem to be pre-warp, excluding them from even being able to be visited directly by Starfleet in the first place. Now, you might be wondering how I came to the conclusion that this is a pre-warp, and even a pre-spacefaring culture. The fact that Picard transports one of the Edo women on board the Enterprise, and she seems to have zero idea what a spaceship is, what space is, or what transportation even is.
But this is a city. A great city. Well, since you have all this power, why be concerned about our laws?
From the starboard lounge, you can see whatever is outside this vessel.
Do you mean my world? You said we'd be high above it.
This would imply that the Edo culture hasn't even made it out of their own atmosphere yet. Next, Picard intervenes in Edo culture, disrupting even their belief in their god by making a very early and very weak Picard speech that changes the Edo god's mind about keeping Wesley Crusher on the planet to face judgment. This, in turn, would throw into question the Edo culture's entire legal system, since they have a all crimes are punishable by death doctrine. Early Star Trek is a very strange place that shouldn't be taken seriously until about Season 2. Data gets drunk. Another Season 1 episode, The Naked Now. The crew of the Enterprise are subject to a viral infection from an adrift Starfleet ship. This virus causes the crew to exhibit what would be considered increasingly intoxicated behavior, which leads to various issues and, of course, the potential destruction of the Enterprise. Because of course it does. This is Season 1. The strange part about this event is the fact that Data gets affected by the virus as well. That's right, the android, a robot, gets infected by a biological virus. The show tries to come up with the excuse that the virus is affecting Data's internal information transfer. But the problem with that is that either that means the virus is physically blocking the circuitry, or the even crazier implication that it's able to interface with the digital language of Data's brain. Or the more likely explanation is that this is a remake of an original series episode, The Naked Time, and they didn't take into account that there was an artificial being on board the Enterprise D. Or the case that the writers forgot Data was an android, or didn't know that androids are robots that just look human. That's it. That's literally the only difference between an android and a robot, is what kind of skin they're wearing. Overall, this is one of those Season 1 oddities that you simply have to attribute to the fact that TNG is a show made in the 80s.
With scripts that were written in the 60s for the original show by writers who grew up in the 30s.
The Tuvix Dilemma. The Tuvix Dilemma is a classic Star Trek morality issue. After Tuvok and Neelix are accidentally combined into one being after transporting with an alien plant in tow, the question becomes, is Tuvix an unwilling conjoinment of two people, or a willing singular entity? Tuvok and Neelix are polar opposites in personality. Tuvok would never want to be physically conjoined with anyone, let alone Neelix. And while Neelix is much more personable, he surely would want to maintain his individuality, especially since being conjoined with Tuvok would cause complications in the fact that Neelix is partnered up with Kes, until he isn't.
It's me, Tom. Your husband.
And Tuvok has a wife back in the Alpha Quadrant.
6.
However, the problem with Tuvix is, he is clearly a sentient being that recognizes who and what he is and has a will of his own. Janeway, though, orders him to die in order to bring back Tuvok and Neelix. This can fall into Spock's old adage, do the needs of the few, Tuvix, outweigh the needs of the many, Tuvok and Neelix. Killing one person restores the lives of two separate individuals, but you are still killing that one life form that has sentience and does not consent to the execution. I don't have an answer for you. But what I can also point out is the fact that this episode does kind of prove that the transporters are doing more than just throwing energy from one place to another. It is in fact able to mix and combine consciousnesses around, create completely separate minds, store them, and possibly even erase them entirely. Again, I'm just going to take a shuttlecraft. Midnight Zone. Topics here are the subspace of lore. Only those who truly care about the franchise will stick around. Alex Kurtzman is not found at these depths. The slingshot effect. The slingshot effect is a method of time travel used predominantly in the original series. By traveling around a star at high warp and using the celestial body's gravitational pull, a ship can experience a slingshot that propels them through time. Accidentally discovered in 2267 when the Enterprise was caught in the gravitational pull of a black star, which caused the ship to travel back to the 1960s. The maneuver was performed again around Earth's sun, allowing the Enterprise to return back to its proper time. The slingshot effect would be used again a year later in 2268 to conduct research on Earth, once again in the 1960s. The Enterprise during this mission would accidentally encounter a being known as Gary 7. While this episode was a backdoor pilot to another series, it is unfortunately canon. The last known use of the slingshot effect would be in 2286, when the Enterprise crew aboard a commandeered Klingon ship used the effect to travel back in time in order to obtain humpback whales, which were long extinct by their time, and bring them back in order to communicate with the alien probe that was causing power failures and massive atmospheric disturbances across Earth. The slingshot effect is described as needing precise calculations and adjustments mid-flight in order to successfully pull it off, or else you are pulled into the star and cooked. So far, only Spock has been shown as having the necessary intelligence to pull it off in real time. The problem is, If Spock can do it, that means pretty much every Vulcan can do it, and on top of that, it means that time travel can casually be done at potentially any star. No wonder the Federation regulates time travel. The Whale Probe. The Whale Probe, as it's referred to, is a cylindrical spacecraft of unknown origins. Again, appearing as a shiny black cylinder, the Whale Probe also has within its internals a spherical object suspended by a beam of energy that serves as the probe's communications device. Unfortunately for any and all electrical systems, as well as the atmosphere itself, the probe's communication signals produce so much energy that they act as a sort of EMP on any and all devices that come within range of it, as well as severely ionizing the atmosphere of at least Earth, causing intense weather systems that threaten to wipe out the surface. It was eventually discovered by Spock during the Enterprise crew's voyage home. Hey, that's the title of the movie. That the probe's communications sounded like whale calls when listened to underwater. This, of course, led the crew to realize that for whatever reason, the probe was trying to get in contact with humpback whales that no longer existed on Earth at the time of the probe's arrival. It wouldn't be until the crew returned from the past, with 2 humpback whales in tow, that the call of the probe would be answered, and all of the destruction the probe had caused up to that point would be undone. The deeper question, of course, is, what is this probe, and what are the implications of the fact that it communicated with whales? The first bit of speculation is that whales are possibly an alien life form on Earth that either integrated themselves with the planet's ecosystem or it was an accidental relationship. Perhaps the probe was there to retrieve the whales from Earth and return them back to their planet of origin. In the non-canon book, Probe, the creators of the probe are in fact a whale-like species, and the probe is capable of terraforming planets into being more hospitable to the whales. But again, this is non-canon. One technical aspect to this that I don't know if the creators thought of, but if this thing is communicating with whales and the communications are capable of shutting down technology and ionizing atmospheres, was the distance that this alien race originally was communicating with the whales at far enough that the communications itself didn't disrupt the atmosphere, or did this probe treat anything in its way that wasn't the whales as hostile? The third piece of speculation: the creators of the probe weren't related to whales at all, but were in communications with them, and sought to bring them to another world, possibly to live in peace, and that plays into a particular issue that was going on in the real world at the time. The fourth piece of speculation. This movie is an environmentalist story, written at a time when the whaling industry had devastated the population of many species of whales, so the writers used it as a mouthpiece to express their disapproval with that industry. I don't hate whales, but I do hate plots that exist purely to lecture me on problems I have no way of solving. In other words, the plot was made to push a message, not a message emerging through a well-thought-out plot. Federation Tolerance Paradox. The tolerance paradox is a well-known philosophical problem within utopian theory. The tolerance of intolerance. Can you have a utopian society that accommodates everyone, even those that reject accommodating everyone? In other words, if in an ever-tolerant society, do you tolerate those that hate you? Realistically, there is no such thing as the perfect utopia. You can have a near-utopian society, which is what I'd describe the Federation as, a government that has a baseline value of equality and peace, but is not so naive and fragile that isolated incidents of intolerance will shatter the whole frame. The people of the Federation understand that there is evil and corruption out there, but they strive to be better. The Federation is strict on its policies, though. It will reject entire cultures and planets because they refuse to adapt to the ideologies of the Federation, which could be considered the Federation being intolerant to intolerance. Mind you, there is no hypocrisy here. The Federation is not violating any tolerance policies, because it never had an all-accepting tolerance policy in the first place. Their established rules of equality, personal freedom, and peace are not absolute. They won't accept everyone because they believe they have to. it's because they don't believe they have to. The Federation is not a utopian society where everyone gets along. The Federation is a near-utopian society where people generally get along. Cetacean Ops. Cetacean Ops is a section of the Enterprise D, which seemingly houses dolphins and whales, mentioned in the blueprint guide to the Enterprise D. Cetacean Ops, located on both decks 13 and 14. Dolphins and whales apparently serve aboard the Enterprise. 12 bottlenose dolphins, which are supervised by 2 whales, are in charge of navigation research, given that these 2 species are naturally familiar with navigating in 3D environments. Now, it might be that since the events of the whale probe, that humanity discovered that whales and dolphins are intelligent enough to be able to participate in Starfleet operations. Part of me thinks this is way too cartoonish, but then I have to remind myself that Data got drunk from a virus, or that you can be killed on Edo for crushing plants. Sometimes I hate what Star Trek forces me to accept as canon. Borg lets Federation win. This is a classic theory. Realistically, almost every battle with the Borg should have ended with Starfleet being completely mopped by them. However, humanity always seems to be able to squeeze out a win at the last moment, which at first glance seems like it means that Starfleet is truly a resourceful and dominant force in the galaxy. Alternatively, the Borg may be allowing the Federation to just barely win their battles, but not winning by such a large margin that the Federation becomes complacent. If you win a battle, but lose hundreds of people in the fight, and only a few ships are left over, a society hell-bent on the well-being and survival of its people are not just going to accept those losses. They're going to try and develop new and more effective weapons against their foes. This means that when the Borg do finally decide to assimilate humanity, they'll be getting a whole host of advanced technology that will further the collective's power and make them even more unstoppable. The Abyss. A place where only the most dedicated Starfleet personnel tread. You may be approached by Section 31 after this. No, not them. Klingons shouldn't be spacefaring. Klingons are not a species known for their emphasis on science and engineering. They are brutish people that value combat and honor more than anything else, and in fact view things like research and development to be a waste of time. So how did these people not only make it to space, but develop faster-than-light travel, transportation, and energy-based weapons? If modern Klingons are in fact what they've always been like, then no, Klingons should not be a spacefaring culture. So the second option I think is the most likely. Klingons were not always so combat and honor focused. I personally subscribe to the idea that pre-warp Klingons were a lot more focused on science and technology, and then once their tech became so widespread and common and easy to use, that they no longer felt they needed as much of a focus on development of tech in order to progress their empire. It's kind of like how today you and me use a smartphone, operate a computer, or fire a weapon, but I personally do not know how to make any of these pieces of technology. I only know how to use them. This might be the same thing that happened to the Klingon Empire. There are scientists that know how to make warp drives, transporters, energy weapons, but the average Klingon warrior has no clue how any of this is actually made. They just know how to use it. Symbiosis. Prime Directive destroyed 2 civilizations. In the Season 1 episode, Symbiosis, the Enterprise encounters 2 cultures that at first appear to have a symbiotic relationship. One culture, the Onarians, at one point being technologically advanced, but after a plague crippled their society, they were reduced to only being an agricultural society. Said infection seemingly still persists to this day, requiring them to take medication for it every 2 to 3 days. The Brekkians, nearly identical to the Onarians, are a culture that, while not as technologically advanced as the Onarians used to be, they did possess the only substance that could cure the plague, affecting their neighboring species. Their economy became completely dependent on producing the medicine for the Onarians. In 2364, it's discovered by Dr. Crusher that the plague is no longer an issue, but this fact is kept hidden by the Breccians due to the fact that their entire economy became focused on creating what was at first a cure. As it turns out, the treatment for the plague was also a highly addictive substance. In effect, the Breccians became interplanetary drug dealers. In the end, Captain Picard, withholding the information that the virus is no longer a problem, and not fixing the 2 remaining trade ships, orders the Onarians and Breccians to be sent down to Onara, and then leaves the system. Here's the thing about this episode. Picard effectively might have killed 2 planets with one move. Ross Scott of Accursed Farms made a great video about this topic. He deduced that since the Onarians still believe that they're infected with a virus that will kill them if they don't get more of the drug, that this will lead to intense battles over the remaining supply of what they think is medicine. With the threat of what the entire population thinks is death, the fallout from that kind of fear would possibly tear their entire civilization to shreds. Certainly, the 2 Breccians sent down to Onara didn't survive, probably taking the weight of the Onarians' hatred for the situation they're stuck in. Especially if it's ever revealed that the virus is gone, and they kept the Onarians addicted to the medicine. The Breccian culture for sure died out, given that their only economic trait was production of the drug. Most likely, they would not have the capabilities of suddenly switching to agriculture. The Onarian people have the resources to survive, but whether or not they have the will to get through the withdrawals, thinking that they're dying, is a question that is swept under the rug and left behind at Warp 9. The other Picard maneuver. Armus, Skin of Evil. In the Season 1 episode, Skin of Evil, a life form is discovered on a seemingly barren planet, Vagra 2, a strange tar-like entity that at first appears as a pool of thick black liquid, but can also take an upright form as well. The creature, named Armus, claims to be the physical embodiment of an ancient culture's discarded negative emotions. All their hatred, cruelty, and violence were literally separated from themselves and concentrated into a new entity. Not much is known about the race of Titans that created the Skin of Evil. What is known is that the Titans abandoned Armus on the planet he now inhabits, left there in complete solitude, festering his hatred for the people who created and abandoned him. Armus is known to be capable of telekinesis, blocking transmissions, transporters, sensor scans, and the ability to discharge energy, destroying someone's synaptic systems. However, what is most interesting about Armus is the implications of what the race of Titans were capable of. Whether through technology, telepathic abilities, or some type of magic mumbo-jumbo, the Titans were able to take conceptual ideas like anger, hatred, and the want to commit violence, and not only physically separate it from themselves, but coalesce it into an entirely new entity. If this was achieved through technology, does this mean that any civilization can be capable of doing the same? Thomas Riker implications. Thomas Riker is an exact duplicate of William Riker, created on accident due to a transporter malfunction in 2361. During Riker's service on the USS Potemkin, an attempt to beam him up from the surface of a planet came into conflict with atmospheric conditions. A second transporter beam was used in an attempt to stabilize the original. However, the second beam reflected back to the surface of the planet, creating an exact duplicate of Riker, who was then unknowingly left on the planet for the next 8 years. He is indistinguishable from the original Riker, sharing the same thoughts, memories, feelings, everything. Though after 8 years on the planet, alone, Thomas Riker became a much different person than his Enterprise counterpart. However, the most disturbing part about this entire situation is, once again, what the transporter is capable of.
I realized there's no margin for error. One atom out of place and poof, you never come back.
Lies. If the imaging scanners are off,
even 1,000%. How many transporter accidents have there been in the last 10 years? 3? Really is the safest way to travel.
Transporter room, come in, urgent. Red line on the transporter, Mr. Scott.
Pattern Enterprise.
Not only is it able to create an entirely new body, but it is capable of duplicating consciousness. This ties into the idea of the transporter killing you during each use. Perhaps the computer is just copying the structure of your neurons, synaptic pathways, and brain cells, then slaps that into an entirely new brain on the other side of the transporter beam. The fact that Thomas Riker exists proves that the transporter is capable of creating copies of someone. The moral implications of this are one of the most uncomfortable conversations in all of Star Trek, and I'm sure the Federation likes to just ignore it. If you aren't taking shuttlecrafts at this point, you have far more courage than I do. Q are future humans. A very common fan theory is that the Q Continuum are actually future humans that are trying to ensure humanity goes down the right path in order to become the Continuum in the first place, or at least are trying to help another timeline of humanity become Q as well. Evidence is drawn in how Q treats humanity throughout the series. Despite the fact that he has observed countless other species in the galaxy, and perhaps further, he seems to have a particular fascination with humanity, given that when he was stripped of his powers and clothing, he chose to become human and be placed aboard the Enterprise. Q, at first, seems openly hostile to humanity, but as his relationship with Picard evolves, his interest in them does too. His malevolence becomes more chaotic neutral, where he'll put humans in seemingly dangerous situations, but ultimately keeps them from any permanent harm. Eventually, Q seems to become something of a lawful good with humanity, especially in the series finale, All Good Things. Here, Q tests Picard's ability to conglomerate information from 3 points in time to figure out how to stop a spatial anomaly from preventing humanity from ever evolving in the first place. Q refers to humanity as a childlike species, still in their developmental stage, which of course implies that humanity, despite their current stage of technology, is capable of far more. Why would a being that practically can be considered God be so invested in one species when there are countless others more advanced than humanity? The obvious theory is that Q are in fact humans. V'ger-Borg connection. So this is one of my own theories, but it does actually have something going for it. Not a lot, mind you, and it is purely based on speculation. But Voyager 6, a deep space probe launched by NASA in the late 1900s, was lost in what used to be called a black hole.
Voyager 6 disappeared into what they used to call a black hole.
The real fate of Voyager 6 seems to be that it was sent possibly to the far side of the galaxy, landing on a planet inhabited by living machines, that then began to build around the probe and continue its mission of gathering all information possible and returning it to the Creator. Now, here's the thing. V'ger was able to absorb and create a near-perfect replica of Ilia. Even though she was an artificial version, the mechanical systems were so spot on, she would appear biological to anyone without a scanner. After all, she even had eye moisture.
Osmotic micropump, right here. And even the smallest body functions are exactly duplicated. Even eye moisture.
She's got it in all the right spots.
What if the Borg are an accidental creation of V'ger? The fact that V'ger can create such complex androids like Ilia, it stands to reason that it can also make cyborg-like technology. Now, we know that the Borg existed well before even the 1900s, when Voyager 6 was sent into space. However, what I propose is that V'ger possibly advanced the Borg during its travels, while they were in a more primitive state, accelerating their technological growth by centuries. Possibly, V'ger's mission to collect all information possible also incepted the idea into this early Borg to accumulate information as well. I have no proof to back any of this up, outside of the fact that both V'ger and the Borg are shown to have machine biological integration, and V'ger possibly passed through areas of the galaxy that the Borg might have inhabited at the time. Alternatively, perhaps V'ger was enhanced by an early version of the Borg and sent off to complete its mission. Now, you might be wondering, if V'ger accidentally helped create the Borg, why didn't they show up in the Alpha Quadrant sooner? Possibly because they were busy collecting and assimilating data within the Delta Quadrant first, while V'ger was on a mission to return to the Alpha Quadrant. Both had different priorities that sent them to different areas. The Continuum. Entries here have transcended beyond mortal existence. They occupy a space our feeble minds could not possibly hope to understand. Yet.
Don't provoke the Borg!
This is a line spoken by Q in the Voyager episode Q2, after Q's son summons a Borg cube to attack the Voyager for his entertainment. Q Sr. becomes irate at the teenager, telling him,
Don't provoke the Borg!
Despite the fact that the Q are an omnipotent and godlike race, the fact that Q would warn one of his own people about not provoking them has led to a lot of speculation. I see this having two different possible meanings. The first, possibly the Continuum see the Borg as a species that has the potential to reach untold power with their accumulation of knowledge and technology. Perhaps the Q fear that the Borg will be able to challenge the Continuum should they be provoked in ways that make them advance their technology, being able to possess similar control over matter and physics. The second, and I like this one more, Q and the Continuum view the Borg as a threat to the galaxy. While they won't directly intervene and destroy the Borg to everyone's benefit, they hope that eventually the Federation might be able to, and the Q are trying to, through non-direct means, keep the Federation safe from the Borg, at least until they're ready to take on the Collective directly. Perhaps this is the Continuum's own version of the Prime Directive. They're allowed to meddle in small affairs, but when it comes to the natural progression of the galaxy, they, like the Federation does for individual cultures, allows the people of the galaxy to find their own way. You know, say for when Q helped Picard to save humanity, extenuating circumstances and all that. And that might have also been one of Q's games, with no actual consequences, and he would have just snapped everything back to normal. Who knows? That's the fun of Q. Or the headache, if you're Picard. O'Brien must suffer. A lesser-known universal constant is the fact that Miles O'Brien must, in fact, suffer. O'Brien has been physically tortured, psychologically tormented, experienced the stressors of war, served a 20-year prison sentence in the matter of minutes. And that's just his marriage to Keiko. O'Brien is the everyman in the Star Trek universe, a hard-working blue-collar engineer and transporter chief. When he's not dreaming of his days of massacring Cardassians, he's down deep in the Jeffries tubes, fixing the problems of DS9. But the subtle tragedy of O'Brien is how many things he's had to suffer through. If you aren't a true main character in the Star Trek universe, you're gonna go through hell without a lot of good payoff. And that's just his marriage to Keiko. Picard's speeches are mind control. Picard is one of the greatest captains in all of Starfleet history. This is presented by the fact that he was assigned the flagship of the entire Federation. Picard has encountered hundreds of new life and new civilizations. He has boldly gone where no one has gone before.
So, what's next? I don't know.
Yet he rarely ever solves conflicts with violence. This is a far cry from someone like Sisko or Janeway.
Commander, I said launch torpedoes.
Aye, sir.
trilithium resin is dissipating throughout the biosphere. The Maquis are scrambling their transport ships. They're starting to evacuate.
Realize that you are not in control here anymore. I can kill you and your crew in an instant. Go ahead.
2 alien vessels are attempting to disengage from Voyager.
And yet, even in the face of certain death, hundreds of thousands of lives at stake, the very foundation of Federation law being put into turmoil, Picard has been able to use diplomacy to get out to the other side clean. It might not actually be that Picard is just that good at being a politician in space. I posit the idea that Jean-Luc Picard uses some form of telepathy to influence those around him. He just uses diplomacy to hide the fact that he has these powers.
No, wait. Hold on.
Continue smoking that in here, and you'll spend the rest of your days under the belief that you're a 6-year-old girl.
Picard has convinced alien gods to ignore their own laws. He's defended the rights of an artificial being, putting in place laws that would protect those that come after. He's caused at least one well-known judge to completely lose her mind and destroy her reputation. He's even put his own career on the line to defend the rights of an android child. Every time, Picard has come out on top, or at the very least has changed almost everyone's mind in the given situation. Perhaps Starfleet is aware of Picard's powers, and that's why they tasked him with the spearhead of the final frontier. Hell, he's such a good politician he can use gibberish and still win the day.
Tamak. The river Tamak in winter. And Jalad at Tanagra. Tamak and Jalad on the ocean.
Magic existed until Season 3 of The Next Generation. The original series and much of early TNG are filled with strange anomalies and phenomena that defy even Star Trek's level of technology or understanding.
The explosive.
Very well, Captain.
You come back in, is it? Well, don't stop. Here I am.
This is not Nancy. If she were Nancy, could she take this?
I am a skin of evil, left here by a race of titans who believed if they rid themselves of me, they would free the bonds of destructiveness.
I'm coming. Where are you?
State the purpose.
Entities are routinely encountered that can reshape reality to whatever they please. The fact that a race of Titans could physically separate their evil from themselves, or Q's very existence, or the Traveler being able to make the Enterprise cross vast distances purely on the energy of people's thoughts. Kevin Uxbridge, genociding an entire species with a single thought. The many instances of reality warping entities encountered by Kirk. Of course, the pseudo-intellectuals will spam the phrase,
any technology sufficiently advanced will be indistinguishable from magic.
But you tell me that all I need to do is plug enough RAM cards into my spine and I can shape reality to my whim? Well, I've already tried. My medical bills are astronomical. That phrase starts to lose its satisfaction when you start converting emotion into physical reality. No amounts of ones and zeros are going to convince me that Armus is the result of shoving a USB cord into an and transferring all your Xbox Live toxicity into a pool of tar. Or, the likely explanation, once again, is that the scripts written for TOS and early TNG come from writers who lived during a period of time when space was viewed as more of a mystical place where anything could happen, rather than following some basic form of physics.
Where did it come from? Who were the all-powerful creatures it brought from outer space?
Father turned against son.
Anyways, I'm done here. one to beam up,